Now they're getting into some Hebrew. That was the Maccabees as the Maccabeatles. Fun way to start a Sunday night of learning. How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. Just getting into a Beatles frame of mind because Nina and I are planning to watch that new Beatles documentary tonight, directed by Peter Jackson. They say it's great. No real connection to our learning in that. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Sunday night. We'll be doing page 11, Tractate Moed Katan. Tonight's episode of AT Daily sponsored by my good friend Chaim Marks, my good friend and golf buddy. And he dedicated this episode in honor of Sal's upcoming 9.9 index or better. That's when you become a single-digit golfer. I've been there before. I'm not there now. With God's help, I'll be there again. Since I'm the coach of the United States Masters team going to the Maccabees games, I got to get my game in order. But this was a case of taking a step back, I think, to take 3 steps forward. I feel it coming. Thank you for your belief in me, Chaim, and may you and your wife and your kids and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. And we say Amen, and thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. All right, who is with us as we get together to do some beautiful learning on a Sunday night? Pauline in Arkansas, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehuda in South Carolina, Nancy in North Carolina, Paul in Chicago, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Renee in Indiana, Paul in the Great Northwest, Melissa in Great Neck, John in Sedona, Lucy in Minnesota, Paul says Shalom, Bella in Florida, Bill is singing na 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 na. Karen is in Northern California, Rebecca in LA, Michael in Indiana, Dawn in LA. People are saying that documentary is good. I'm excited. Jeannie's in Indiana and Sam in Virginia. Over there on the YouTube side, Lindsay in Cincinnati, Jeannie in Valley Village. Welcome everybody. All right, big daf. Let's try to get through the whole thing. We're going to finish chapter 1 tonight with God's help and get into chapter 2. So we pick it up a few lines from the top on the A side of page 11. Generally speaking, this first chapter was about the kinds of work that are permitted on the intermediate days of the festival, basically to prevent a significant financial loss and as long as it's not going to create excessive exertion on the person. Mishnah number 9, the final Mishnah of chapter 1. One may construct a railing for a roof or a balcony if it is done in a non-professional manner as the work of a layman, but not if it is done skillfully as the work of a craftsman. Now, making a railing around your roof or balcony, that is a Torah commandment, a written commandment commandment written out in the Torah, part of the written law. That if you've got a roof and the rooftops were available, people in ancient times used to sleep on their rooftops at times. But that rooftop needed to have a railing around it by Torah law. Why? Because somebody could be walking around up there, sleepwalking even, and fall off the roof. And so you have a positive obligation to put up safety features, a railing, so that people don't do that. Now, if you constructed that during the intermediate days of the festival, so that's like construction, right? We don't engage in construction, really only to prevent a loss or for public need or for the needs of the festival itself. Now, you can't have an unguarded, unsafe place up there, so you can build a railing, but it shouldn't be the final version of the railing because then it's like you're engaged in construction on your house. You should put up some kind of a temporary structure that will ensure people's safety, but not be the final version of that railing. One may plaster the cracks in an oven and roll over them with a roller. Remember, these are clay ovens in the ancient world. A wooden tool, and so you can roll over them with a roller when you're smoothing out these cracks with a roller. And that's a wooden tool used to smooth out clay with a hand or a foot, but not with a presser, a tool that is especially designed for this task. You want to be able to use your oven so you can cook delicious treats on the festival. You can have a festive meal. So you're going to have to fix those cracks in the oven, but it shouldn't be the final repair, according to that opinion. With regard to the hinge of a door and the cylinder of the hinge and the crossbeam that holds the door and the lock and a key that broke, so one may fix them on the intermediate days of a festival, as these items are essential for the festival and their repair cannot be delayed. And this is permitted, provided that he does not intend ahead of time to do his labor on the festival and delay it until that time. The door broke during the festival. Now you've got an unsafe condition. A bad guy could walk into your house, so you can make that repair. And with regard to all preserved food from which one can eat on the festival, since they became ready to be eaten in a short amount of time, he may preserve them on the intermediate days of a festival. It's funny to me that we're reading about, you can take whatever measures are necessary to make sure that your house is secure, both from somebody falling off the roof and from a bad guy coming in. You can, secure the front door. Funny to me that we're reading this today because just last night, Nina and I were sitting in the living room watching a movie, and a light went on outside, kind of a safety light, and I just put up a camera a couple weeks ago out there, and then I looked at the video. We thought maybe it was like a possum or something, but no, it was a bad guy. There was a bad guy who was coming up our side alley, headed for the gate, where he was gonna, be in our backyard. Had to be up to no good. The light came on, and he saw the camera, and that discouraged him. And so he literally jumped through the bushes into my neighbor's property. And then, I called the police. I showed them the video. They rang her doorbell. Today I saw the video from her security camera. And this guy just walked right across her front yard, right in front of her front porch, and then disappeared from that camera. What he was doing, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, is it worth it putting up these cameras and lights? Yeah, it's worth it. There's just rising crime these days, and you really have to be careful. Okay, the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what are the circumstances in which a railing is considered the work of a layman? And Rav Yosef said, right, so you can put up that railing on your roof, but it shouldn't be the final version, so you're not engaged in home construction. You're just securing the roof so that it's safe during the festival. What are the circumstances in which a railing is considered the work of a layman as opposed to a professional? And Rav Yosef said, when it is made with palm branches and the branches of bay trees, which do not create a permanent structure. And it was taught in a Baraisa that he fills in the space with stone, but he does not plaster the stones with clay, right? You're going to put up a barrier out of wood that's temporary wood, or if you use stones up there, okay, you can put the stones in place, but not cement it. Unless I imagine that if putting the stone in place was going to create an unsafe condition, then you could cement it, right? It has to be safe. It was taught in the Mishnah, one may plaster the cracks in an oven and roll over them with a roller, with a hand or a foot, but not with a presser, not with a professional tool that makes the final repair. So it'll make the oven usable, but it's not the final repair. The Gemara asks, well, now that you said that it is permitted to roll over the cracks with a roller, not a presser, is it necessary to say that one may plaster the cracks with a hand or a foot? I mean, the roller is going to make a better repair than just doing it by hand or foot. And the Gemara answers that this is what the Mishnah is saying. One may plaster the cracks in an oven and roll over them as if with a roller, meaning with a hand or a foot, but not with a presser, which is a craftsman's tool made especially for this. Interestingly, in the note, it says that if you were so skilled with your hand that you could make a perfectly smooth repair as if it was done with a presser, would that be permitted? Yes, it would. It was taught in the Mishnah with regard to the hinge of a door and the cylinder of the hinge and the crossbeam that holds the door and a lock and a key that broke. One may fix them on the intermediate days of the festival. The Gemara raises a contradiction to this from a different Mishnah, Meiser Sheni 5:15. Until the days of Yochanan the high priest, workmen's hammers would beat in Jerusalem on the intermediate days of a festival. So one can deduce from this Mishnah that until his days, yes, the workmen's hammers would beat, but from then on, no, because Yochanan the high priest banned such work. This seems to contradict the Mishnah here that permits fixing certain items on the intermediate days of the festival, even with a craftsman, right? That a craftsman could fix your door. This seems to say that after the days of Yochanan the high priest, craftsmen were not allowed to do anything on the intermediate days of the festival. Gemara answers, La Kasha, this is not difficult. There, when it is prohibited, it is referring to the work of smiths, which generate a great deal of noise. Here, where it is permitted, it is referring to the work of carpenters, which is much quieter. And Rav Chisda strongly objects to this. If so, people will say that a loud noise is prohibited, but a soft noise is permitted. Rather than the distinction between professionals and amateurs, just loud or soft noises, we can't have this. Rather, Rav Chisda said that the apparent contradiction is not difficult for a different reason. This Mishnah that permits labor is referring to sickles, as sickles emit no noise at all, whereas that Mishnah that prohibits labor is referring to chisels. Rav Papa said, here in the Mishnah it is referring to the period before the decree of Yochanan the high priest, whereas there in the other Mishnah it is referring to the period after the decree. So here we seem to have a different principle, right? This is labor that's permitted. Why? Right? Not necessarily for the needs of the festival, for the public need, or to prevent a significant loss, but it seems like before they made this decree, and it must have been made in the time of Yochanan the high priest, so they permitted this kind of work on hamoed, the intermediate days, and then they made this decree, and then it was no longer permitted. But they're saying, well, maybe no, that's not the distinction. It's not just a point in time, but there's certain kinds of labor, maybe for the needs of the festival, maybe to prevent significant loss. But if they're too loud, it's not a question of exertion, but it's still going to give too much of the appearance that people are working in the city, and so we're going to prohibit that kind of labor. That's an interpretation of what's going on here. Much quiet after the decree. Rav Ashi said, that Mishnah, which prohibits this labor, was taught in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, while this Mishnah was taught in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei. Now, usually Rabbi Yosei trumps, right, when he's against somebody else. As Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, who is the Tana who taught that all labor performed on the intermediate days of a festival must be done with a shinui, with a change, right? In the same way that on Shabbos, if we're going to pick up a muktzah object like a hammer, which has no permitted use on Shabbos, but we need its place, right? Because it's lying on the dining table. Somebody forgot it there. So we want to get it off the dining table. So I'm not going to pick it up the way I would normally pick up a hammer. I'm going to pick it up with a shinui, a change. That word is similar to Mishnah. Mishnah means repetition, right? But learning something different each time. So a shinui is like doing it with a change. So what am I doing? I'm going to pick up that hammer like between my fingers or with my left hand or with my pinky and my thumb so that somebody who's watching me would immediately see that I don't think it's permitted to pick up that hammer on Shabbos. I'm picking it up with a shinui. Likewise, this work, okay, you could do certain kinds of work on hamoed, but it's going to be done with a shinui, some kind of a difference, like using non-professional tools or making it temporary or some kind of a change so that anyone who's looking at it can see, oh yeah, this is permitted work, but we know it, we're acknowledging that it's chol hamoed, and so we're doing it with a change. So Rabbi Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, who is the Tana who taught that all labor permitted on chol hamoed must be done with a shinui in this altered manner, even with regard to a matter that will be lost if timely action is not taken, right? So even to prevent a significant loss, they're going to permit that work to be done, but you do it with a change. Well, this is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, as Rabbi Yosei permits doing labor that will prevent that significant financial loss, even when it is done in its usual manner. Ravina said, in accordance with whose opinion do we now lift the lintel above the door in order to drive in the nails that had loosened on the intermediate days of a festival? And we do this in the usual manner. In accordance with whose opinion is this? It is done in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei, who permits labor that will prevent financial loss even when it is done in the usual manner. It was taught in the Mishnah with regard to all preserved food from which he can eat on the festival. He may preserve them on the intermediate days of a festival. The Gemara relates that the Bedita River once overflowed, depositing large quantities of fish in small deposits on the riverbank on the intermediate days of a festival. Everyone went and trapped and brought home fish, and Rava permitted them to salt some of the fish. What's the issue? If you're taking something that's going to spoil, this fish, this large quantity of fish that suddenly appeared on the riverbank, so if you're salting a bunch of that fish, you're preserving it. Are you going to eat all of it during the festival? If there's that much fish, no. So if you're doing the work of preserving the fish for the purpose of eating that fish after the festival, so that should be prohibited. You should only be doing, food-related work that's for the needs of the festival, during the days of the festival. So why did Rava permit them to salt the fish? Abaye said to him, didn't we learn in the Mishnah, with regard to all preserved food from which he can eat on the festival, he may preserve them on the intermediate days of the festival. But in this case, it is impossible to eat that much fish on the festival, and therefore preserving them should be prohibited. Rava said to him, since they initially brought these fish with the intention of eating them during the festival, and it only became clear afterward that they had brought too many, and if one would leave them without salting them, they would be ruined. Now we have the situation where we're going to have a significant financial loss to the merchandise, and therefore salting them is prohibited. You couldn't pick up that many fish with that intention in the beginning, but having done so by mistake, as it were, accidentally, now you've got this large quantity of fish, so you're allowed to preserve it. And some say that it did not happen in this manner. Rather, Rava permitted them to trap the fish, to bring it home, and to salt them. And they knew that they had so many fish. And Abaye said to him, didn't we learn in the Mishnah, with regard to all preserved food from which you can eat on the festival, he may preserve them on the intermediate days. But these fish were heavily salted, and they consequently could not be eaten until they thoroughly dried out. And Rava said to him, these fish that were just salted can also be eaten now. We don't have to wait, so many days or weeks for this salting process to be completed before we can actually come back and eat them. Rather, there's a procedure for eating fish that have recently been salted. These fish that were just salted can also be eaten now by pressing out the salt and brine, and therefore they too are fit to be eaten on the festival, as in that case of Shmuel, where they prepared recently salted fish for him by pressing it 60 times, and he ate the fish. And the Gemara relates that Rava happened to come by the house of the exilarch, the head of the Jewish community in Bavel, in Babylonia, and they prepared freshly salted fish for him by pressing it 60 times, and he ate it. And apropos eating fish in various ways, the Gemara relates that Rav once happened to come to the house of Rav Shapir, and they brought before him a certain fish, of which 1/3 was cooked, 1/3 was salted and made edible via pressing, and 1/3 was broiled. 1/3 cooked, 1/3 salted, and then made edible via pressing, repeated pressing, and 1/3 was broiled. And Rav said, Ada the fisherman told me that a fish, so it's like they had fish 3 ways, right? The modern lingo of Top Chef. So they had the same fish 3 ways. And Rav said, Ada the fisherman told me that a fish that has sat for some time and is close to spoiling is at its best. You don't want the fish too fresh. And Rav also said, Ada the fisherman told me, with regard to a fish, broil it with its brother, place it in its father, eat it with its son, and drink after its father. What does he mean? With regard to a fish, broil it with its brother. In other words, with salt, which like fish also comes from the sea. Broil it with salt. That's its brother. Place it in its father, i.e. in water. Eat it with its son, i.e. the fish brine that comes from the fish. You should eat with the fish. And drink after it its father. Right? So after you've had some of this fish, especially the very salty, briny fish, the way they were preparing it, make sure you drink some water. And in addition, Rav said, Ada the fisherman, right? This great fisherman with an expertise not only catching the fish but in cooking it. Rav said, Ada the fisherman told me, after eating fish, cress, and milk, let the body carry them and let not the bed carry them, i.e., it is advisable to go for a walk after eating them rather than immediately going to sleep. I would say that that's good advice after any meal. I don't do it enough, but I've definitely seen that if after I have a meal, I take a walk around the block, much better digestion. And Rav said, Ada the fisherman told me, after eating fish, cress, and milk, it is better to drink water and not beer. And if he has no water, he should drink beer and not wine in order to avoid harming his body. That concludes chapter 1 here of Tractate Moed Katan. Chapter 2, Mishnah number 1. The Mishnah discusses one who had already turned over his olives as part of the process of preparing them for pressing, in other words, to make olive oil, and mourning for a close relative befell him, and as a result, he was prohibited from engaging in work, right? So this is somebody who has an olive orchard. He has harvested the olives. He has turned over the olives. So presumably it's like they lie out in whatever this process is. He starts the process of pressing the olives. He reaches the point where he's turned them over. I think that now they're ready to be pressed, but the pressing hasn't begun. But he's mid-process, right, of making the olive oil, and his close relative dies. Let's say his parent, God forbid. So now this person is in Shiva. He's going to go into the 7 days of intense mourning. A mourner is not permitted to do work. It's not Shabbos for him, right? It's like he can pick up stuff, he can turn a light switch on and off. But it's very similar to the kinds of work that are not permitted on chol hamoed, and that's why it's coming up in this context. So, but the relationship between the work that's prohibited to a mourner and the work prohibited or permitted during the intermediate days of a festival, it's going to take a lot of defining. So we haven't made it clear yet from this initial foray in the Mishnah, and we're going to get clearer and clearer about it. And we're also going to talk about the case where somebody started to do some work to prepare for a festival. His relative died. He becomes a mourner. Then the festival began. What is going to be permitted for him and what is not going to be permitted, all right? So the one who had already turned over his olives as part of the process of preparing them for pressing, mourning for a close relative befell him, and so as a result, he was prohibited from engaging in work, or some other unavoidable accident occurred, or his workers misled him, promising to come but failing to do so that he could not press his olives before the festival. He intended to press all his olives before the festival, and he was going to have nice fresh olive oil to use during the festival. Under these circumstances, during the intermediate days of the festival, he may place the olives in the press and load the beam with weights for the initial pressing of the olives and leave it in this way until after the festival. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. So it seems like when you're mid-process, it's bad. If you interrupt the process, it could really harm all the olives. So basically what they're, I think, allowing him to do is even during the intermediate days of the festival, do some of that work, like put it in the press, put the beam on top, and start the pressing, but not do the full pressing. Rather, put some weights on it and then just let it, let the process go, not at its normal speed, but so that it's happening by itself during the festival, and then he could really get into it and complete it after the festival. What are they doing? Allowing him to do some work otherwise prohibited to avoid significant loss. Rabbi Yosei says he may press the olives and complete the process and then plug each barrel of oil in its usual manner, since delay can entail financial loss. The sages, as agreeing with Rabbi Yosei in this, just allow him to do the work. He doesn't have to do partial work, work with a shinui. Rabbi Yosei allows, if it's to avoid significant loss, you could do the work. That's Mishnah number 1 here of chapter 2. The Gemara asks, well, the Tana of our Mishnah, right, whoever wrote out this Mishnah, opens the Mishnah with a case of mourning, the mourner, right? His work was interrupted because he became a mourner. But he ends with the laws of chol hamoed, the intermediate days of the festival, leaving the connection between the work that's prohibited for the mourner and the work that's prohibited or permitted on the intermediate days of the festival. That connection is not clear. So Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi, said That is to say, actions that are permitted on the intermediate days of a festival are prohibited during the days of one's mourning. Therefore, if a mourning period befell one before the festival, and he could not prepare properly for the festival due to the prohibition against performance of labor by a mourner, then he is permitted to perform labor during the intermediate days of the festival to avoid financial loss, right? So even the work that is permitted to be done during the intermediate days of the festival, which is much less than what is permitted on a regular weekday, the mourner is not permitted to do even that kind of work because he's very limited. He should be focusing on his mourning. But to prevent significant loss, he's going to be allowed to do what the rest of us can do on the intermediate days of the festival. Rav Ashi said that the Tana of the Mishnah is speaking, utilizing the didactic style of it is not necessary. What does this mean? He is teaching two separate laws, one about mourning and the other about the festival. It is not necessary to state that during the days of his mourning, when the prohibition against labor is rabbinic, that it is permitted to perform labor that if delayed could cause serious loss, because it's a rabbinic law, so we're going to be flexible with it. But even on the intermediate days of the festival, when the prohibition against performing labor is by Torah law, performing such labor is permitted because in the case of a loss, the sages permitted it. Now, just to review, this idea that the work that's prohibited on the intermediate days of a festival is by Torah law, Rav Ashi's statement serves as evidence for those commentaries that understand that the prohibition against performing labor during the intermediate days of a festival is by Torah law. Those who argue that it is by rabbinic decree explain that Rav Ashi's point is that the prohibition against performing labor during the intermediate days of a festival is more stringent than the mourning period. And this is because there is at least an intimation in the Torah to that effect with regard to the festivals when you're, obligated to rejoice, as opposed to the mourning period where there is no such association. The Torah doesn't spell out this idea that during the days of your mourning, you're not permitted to do work, right? The rabbis decreed that so that the mourner should be able to focus on his mourning. And the Gemara comments, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Shesha, the son of Rav Edi. These are the actions that others perform for the mourner during the days of his mourning. If his olives have already been turned over, so the other people may load them for him into the olive press. And likewise, if his cask needs to be plugged, or his flax needs to be lifted out of the soaking pool, where it will rot if it's not removed in time, or if his wool needs to be lifted from the cauldron into which it was placed for dyeing, they perform all these actions for him, so he avoids significant loss. They also irrigate his field when his turn for water arrives, as in many places, each field would receive its water in turn. And if the farmer wasn't there when it's his turn to receive the water from the irrigation channel, he would miss his turn and the crops would suffer as a result. So during your mourning, you're not supposed to do any work, but to avoid a significant loss, others can do that work for you. You yourself should still not do it. And the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Yehuda says, they also sow for him a plowed field or a field set aside for flax where the time of sowing is critical. If the field is sown later, it will cause a loss. The sages said to him, well, if that field is not sown in the early season, it can be sown in the later season. And similarly, if it is not sown with flax, it can be sown with another species. Therefore, this is not considered a great loss, and the sages did not permit this work to be done for the mourner. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, if his olives have already been turned over, and there is no skilled worker available who knows how to press them properly but him, or his cask needs to be plugged and there is no skilled worker available but him, or his flax needs to be lifted out of the soaking pool, or his wool needs to be lifted from the cauldron, and there is no skilled worker available but him, so he may perform all these actions himself, but he should do it in private, so that people walking by shouldn't say, this guy doesn't realize that he's a mourner, he shouldn't be doing this. No, he can do it to avoid significant loss, but he should find a way to do it privately so it doesn't create the appearance of impropriety during the days of his mourning. It might give, since he's a serious mourner, like it's for a parent. And we wouldn't want people to think that this guy or this woman, didn't honor her parents, didn't care for his parents, and that's why he's doing work while he should be in Shiva. He's doing it to avoid a big financial loss, but he should do it privately. And that's only in the case where only he can do it. If at all possible, a friend should do it for him. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel said further, if this mourner was a craftsman who serves the public, providing necessary service, or a barber, or a bath attendant for the public, and the time of the festival arrived, i.e., it was the eve of a festival, and there's no other skilled worker available but him, well, then he may perform the labor even in public, as the needs of the public take precedence over the mourning of an individual. So this poor guy, he's the only barber in town. Everybody wants to get a haircut on the eve of the festival so they can enter the festival, well-groomed, and it's part of rejoicing in the festival. So he shouldn't be doing that kind of work. He's a professional barber. Now he's a mourner. He should be sitting in his house for 7 days and just, taking solace in his mourning period. But if he does that, no one's going to get the shave or haircut that they need, so he is allowed to do that work. Because it fulfills the public need. And the Baraisa continues, tenant farmers who farm the land of others in exchange for a certain percentage of the crop, and leasers who work the land in exchange for a fixed amount of the crop, and contractors who work the land in exchange for a set amount of money, are included amongst those for whom others may perform their labor when they are in mourning. Right? So this person, agreed to do this farm work, either in return for a percentage of what he harvests, or for a fixed amount of what he harvests, or for money. In any case, he said he was going to be there for the farmer as one of the workers. Now his mourning is on him. Somebody else needs to go and do that job for him, because the one who hired him shouldn't have to suffer because this guy is having his mourning period. And in contrast, donkey drivers, camel drivers, and sailors are those for whom others may not perform their work during the mourning periods. However, if they or their animals were leased or hired out to others, then the animals may perform the work because they were hired personally and cannot be replaced without a loss. A day laborer, even if he is in a different city where his mourning status is not public knowledge, may not perform his work. They can find another day laborer. If a commission for others was his responsibility, then even if it was by contract and he was paid not by the day but upon its completion, he may not perform that labor. It can wait till the week of mourning ends, then he can go do the work. And the statement in the Baraisa that one may not... Now, there's a lot of complexity, as you're seeing already, different cases and different sort of yes or no on work that can be done during the Shiva. So, if, God forbid, you lose a close relative and you're sitting Shiva and you're wondering whether you can do certain kinds of work during that week, check with your local rabbi. That hearing this once is not going to cover it. There's a good article about it on Chabad. I'm sure there's another one on Aish. That you'll see that there's a lot of cases, a lot of nuances, a lot of complexity to these laws. So if you're ever in that situation, check with your rabbi. And the Gemara asks, so the statement in the Baraisa that one may not perform a task for others, even if it was by contract, implies that it is not necessary to state that if it was not by contract, then the work is certainly prohibited to the mourner. The Gemara asks, well, on the contrary, when he works by contract, it is considered as though it was his own work, since he simply receives payment for the completed task. Non-contracted labor, where he is paid for the time that he works, is not viewed as his own, and it is conceivable that it would be permitted during the mourning period. And the Gemara concludes, rather, amend the text and say that the Baraisa should read, if a commission for others was his responsibility, then whether by contract or not by contract, he may not perform it, right? Usually the answer is, you can't do the work, maybe others can do it for you, or maybe the work just has to wait. And the Baraisa continues, if he commissioned others to perform his work, Then if it was in his house, they may not perform the work, but if it was in another house, they may perform it, right? In his house, work should not be happening. This is the Shiva house. This is the house of mourning. We don't want work going on in that house. And the Gemara relates that Marion, the son of Ravin, and Mar, the son of, so Maryon, the son of Ravin, and Mar, the son of Rav Acha, the son of Rava, held a team of 2 oxen in partnership between them, 1 ox apiece. An event, i.e., a death in the family, befell Mar, the son of Rav Acha, the son of Rava. And he detached his ox from the team, and that prevented any work from being performed by the team. Why did he do that? Because he did not want work performed with his animal during the days of his mourning. So Rav Ashi said, a distinguished man like Mar, the son of Rav Acha, is behaving this way? Granted, he is not concerned about his own loss. Okay, he can absorb the loss if his ox doesn't work during the days of his mourning. But is he not concerned about the loss of others, i.e. his partner? Now that he removed his ox from the team, his partner in the business of owning those oxen is also losing money, and that guy's not a mourner. Why not just let his ox work alongside his partner's ox? He is personally not involved in that. Isn't it taught in the Baraisa cited above? If they or their animals were hired out or leased to others, then the animals may perform their work. So in that case, why not allow the partner to work with the animal of Mar, the son of Rav Acha? And the Gemara explains, but Mar, the son of Rav Acha, maintains a hashava person is different. A prominent person, a significant person, a well-known person, one of the sages. So even if, strictly speaking, something is permitted, a prominent person must be more stringent with himself so that people do not learn to take, this is the end, the halacha, the law, lightly. If they saw that this sage, his oxen are working while he's in mourning, they might come to think, oh, well, even if it's not part of a team, I could just send my ox to work and I could be making some money during the mourning. This was special circumstance. It was part of a team co-owned with a partner. But even though it would technically be permitted, because he's significant, he was more stringent with himself and didn't allow his ox to work. That is the end of our page. Tomorrow, God willing, we'll pick it up with page 12 here in Tractate Moed Katan. Let's see if there are any questions or comments on page 11. Just a couple. Yosef, I've been trying to figure out what overall guiding principles the sages decide things in their time between a Torah command and a rabbinic decree that relies on cultural sensitivities. I hope I could articulate this question adequately. In other words, what is the line between allowing culture to dictate and plain meaning of the scriptures? It's rare that they're allowing something because of the culture, right? They're usually allowing something because they find a leniency that makes sense within scripture and allows them to justify something that people are doing. But they're not going to do it just because the people are doing it. Generally speaking, the main principle is in matters of written Torah law, in cases of doubt, they're going to rule stringently. In matters of a rabbinic decree, in a case of doubt, they're going to rule leniently. They're going to maybe try to find leniencies, but another general principle is it's much easier for a rabbi to say no than to say yes, right? When in cases of doubt, rabbis are going to tend to just say, don't do it, because maybe I'm not sure. You might come to bend the law. You might come to break the law. You might come to commit a transgression. So since I'm not sure, since this case is a little mushy, just don't do it. It takes great expertise, tremendous expertise to say, yes, it is permitted. You can do it. And you can, bank on my ruling that I'm letting you do that. And you won't commit a transgression, and I won't come to commit a transgression in permitting you to do that. But it takes tremendous learning for rabbis to be able to do that. Right? It's easier to say no than to say yes. So when they're looking for ways to say yes, they're going to be very exhaustive in analyzing the various cases and any applicable verses from the Torah, how it might apply, how it might not apply. And we don't, the rabbis aren't, later rabbis aren't looking to find, analogies and what do I call it? Exegetical permits, as it were, from the verses. Mostly that was already done in ancient times. And they're going to find a leniency that was already established and see if there's a way to apply it to a situation. But that basic principle is, in cases of doubt for written law, they're going to be stringent for sure. In cases of doubt about a rabbinic decree, they will tend to be lenient. And Sharon, what determines significant loss? Is it quantified anywhere? It's funny, like we've just had a lot of cases, like his crop will rot, or all these fish that were collected will rot. The field will dry up and he won't have a crop that year because it didn't get watered during the intermediate days. Is it that half of his, inventory will be ruined? Is it a third? I don't think we've had a real, sort of measurable number on that where we're clear on what constitutes significant versus insignificant. So it seems to be like one of those cases where we know where we see it. But maybe we'll have more cases where that particular question gets analyzed a little bit, more, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not stringent, but, with a little bit more precision. We'll see. But I don't think we've had it yet. You're right, Sharon. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page 12. All the best. Have a great night.